The dust devil rose like a prayer from the cracked earth, spinning its way across the barren valley where nothing had grown for 3 summers running. Clara Whitmore pulled her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders, watching the whirlwind dance between the skeletal remains of what had once been her husband's wheat fields. The weight of her wedding ring seemed heavier today than it had yesterday, heavier than it had been the day before that, when she'd first considered what she was about to do. Her bare feet found familiar grooves in the hardpan as she walked the 1.5 miles to town, little Emma's hand clasped in her own. The child hadn't spoken in weeks, not since they'd buried what remained of their provisions behind the collapsed barn. At 7 years old, Emma understood hunger in ways that would have broken Clara's heart, if she'd had any heart left to break. The child's dress, once blue as summer sky, hung like a sail on her thin frame, and her eyes held that hollow look that Clara had seen too often in the mirror lately. The town of Bitter Creek sat squat against the horizon like a collection of weathered bones, its few remaining buildings casting short shadows in the merciless noon sun. Half the storefronts stood empty, their windows either boarded up or staring out like dead eyes. The Great Drought had claimed more than crops. It had swallowed dreams, families, entire ways of life. Clara counted 7 buildings, still showing signs of habitation as she walked down what had once been Main Street, her daughter's small footsteps echoing her own in the eerie silence. Murphy's General Store occupied the corner lot where 2 dirt roads met, its sign hanging at an angle that suggested either carelessness or despair. Clara had known Sean Murphy for 15 years, had watched him marry his sweet Irish bride, had attended the christening of their 3 boys. She'd traded eggs and milk and garden vegetables at his counter in better times, when the Whitmore farm had been a source of plenty rather than a monument to loss. Now she stood before his door with nothing but gold to offer, and the bitter irony wasn't lost on her. The bell above the door gave a weak chime as they entered, and Sean looked up from his ledger with eyes that had seen too much sorrow lately. His red beard, once full and proud, had grown thin and streaked with premature gray. The shelves behind him, which had once groaned under the weight of canned goods and dry supplies, now held more shadows than substance. But there was still food there. Clara could see it, enough to keep her and Emma alive for another few weeks if she could make the trade. Clara Whitmore, Sean said, his Irish accent softened by years under the American sun. Haven't seen you in town for a spell. His eyes flicked to Emma, taking in the child's condition with a mixture of compassion and helplessness that Clara recognized all too well. How are you managing out there? Clara's throat worked for a moment before she found her voice. We're not, she said simply. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the ring, holding it up so the thin light from the window caught the gold band and the small diamond that had once symbolized all her hopes for the future. I need to trade this for whatever food you can spare. Sean Murphy stared at the ring for a long moment, his weathered hands frozen above his ledger. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, broken only by the distant sound of wind rattling loose boards somewhere down the street. Clara watched his face, seeing the war between practicality and conscience playing out in his expression. She knew he had his own family to feed, his own struggles to survive in this wasteland that had once been fertile prairie. Clara, he said finally, his voice gentle but firm, I can't take that ring. Not because I don't want to help you, but because there's nothing I can give you in return that would be worth what you're offering. He gestured at his sparse shelves. I've got maybe 2 weeks of supplies left, and after that. He shrugged, the gesture speaking volumes about his own uncertain future. Emma's small hand tightened in Clara's purse, and Clara felt something inside her chest crack like drought-parched earth. She'd been so certain that the ring would be their salvation, had spent sleepless nights calculating how long they might survive on whatever supplies it could buy. The possibility that even her most precious possession might not be enough had never truly entered her mind until this moment. Please, she whispered, and the word came out broken. There has to be something. I'll work for you, clean the store, anything. Emma and I. We just need a chance to make it through until the rains come back. Even as she spoke the words, she wondered if the rains would ever come back, if this vast sky would ever again release its bounty upon the thirsting earth. Sean's eyes softened, and he came around the counter, crouching down to Emma's level. Hey there, little darling, he said gently. You remember my boy Patrick, don't you? He's about your age. Emma nodded solemnly, her thumb creeping toward her mouth in a gesture Clara hadn't seen since she was much younger. He's been asking after you. Worried about his friend Emma, Clara felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. Weakness wouldn't feed her daughter. wouldn't put a roof over their heads or clothes on their backs. She was about to speak when the sound of hoofbeats on hard ground interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she could see a rider approaching, sitting tall in his saddle despite the heat that shimmered up from the road like liquid silver. The horse was magnificent, a chestnut mare whose coat seemed to glow even in the harsh light, her muscles flowing like water beneath her rider's gentle hands. But it was the man himself who caught Clara's attention. He was young, perhaps her own age or a little older, with dark hair that curled at the edges beneath his worn hat and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was something about the way he carried himself, a confidence that spoke not of arrogance but of competence, of someone who had found his place in this harsh world and made peace with it. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle, tied his horse to the hitching post with practiced movements, and pushed through the store's door. The bell chimed again, a sound that seemed almost cheerful in contrast to the heavy atmosphere that had settled over the conversation between Clara and Sean. The newcomer's eyes swept the store's interior, taking in the sparse shelves, the desperate woman clutching a gold ring, the hollow-eyed child at her side. "Afternoon, Sean," he said, his voice carrying the easy warmth of old friendship. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Sean straightened, relief evident in his posture. "Jake Brennan, you're a sight for sore eyes. Just trying to figure out how to help Mrs. Whitmore here." The introduction hung in the air, and Clara felt the stranger's attention settle on her like a physical weight. His storm gray eyes were kind but measuring, taking in details that others might miss. The careful mending in her dress, the way she held herself despite obvious hunger, the protective angle of her body toward her daughter. "Mrs. Whitmore," Jake said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed to come as naturally as breathing. "Jake Brennan. My father owns the Rocking Bee Ranch about 10 miles north of here." Clara had heard of the Brennan spread, one of the few operations that seemed to be weathering the drought better than most. There were rumors of artesian wells, of careful water management, of a man who had planned for lean years during times of plenty. "Mr. Brennan," Clara replied, acutely aware of how she must look to this well-dressed rancher's son. His clothes were dusty from travel but well-made, his boots broken in but not broken down. Everything about him spoke of resources, of security, of the kind of future she had once thought possible for herself and Emma. Jake's gaze fell to the ring still clutched in her hand, and something shifted in his expression. "Sean tells me you're looking to trade. Mind if I ask what for?" His tone was curious rather than intrusive, holding none of the judgment she had expected from someone in his position. Clara lifted her chin, gathering the remnants of her pride around her like armor. "Food," she said simply. "Enough to keep my daughter and me alive until we can figure out what comes next." The words were matter of fact, but she couldn't keep the tremor entirely out of her voice when she looked down at Emma's upturned face. "I see." Jake was quiet for a moment, his eyes moving from Clara to Emma to the ring and back again. "That's a beautiful piece of jewelry. Wedding ring?" When Clara nodded, he continued, "Must have been a hard decision, thinking about trading it away." "Not as hard as watching my daughter starve," Clara replied with a directness that surprised even her. "Things are just things, Mr. Brennan. People are what matter." A slow smile spread across Jake's face, transforming his serious features. "My father always said you can judge a person's character by what they're willing to sacrifice for others. Seems to me you've got character in spades, Mrs. Whitmore." He glanced at Sean, some silent communication passing between the two men. "Tell you what, I was heading back to the ranch anyway, and we're always looking for good people. How would you feel about a job?" Clara felt her heart skip. "What kind of job?" "Nothing fancy," Jake said, his tone casual in a way that didn't quite hide the underlying seriousness. "We've got a big house that could use someone to help with cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. Emma here looks like she might enjoy helping in the garden we're trying to keep going behind the house. There's a small cabin on the property that's been empty for a while. Needs some work, but it's sound. Room and board, plus wages." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. Fair wages. The offer was so unexpected, so perfectly tailored to their desperate needs, that Clara felt dizzy with the possibility of it. But years of hardship had taught her to examine gifts carefully for hidden costs. "Why?" she asked. "You don't know anything about me? About whether I can cook or clean or whether I'm honest or hardworking, don't I?" Jake's smile widened. Lady willing to trade away her wedding ring to feed her child, keeping her dignity intact while asking for help. Raising a daughter who stands quiet and brave in the face of hardship? I'd say I know plenty about your character. He tipped his hat to Emma. Besides, something tells me this young lady and I are going to be great friends. The ride to the Rocking Bee Ranch passed in a dreamlike haze for Clara, Emma seated securely in front of her on Jake's gentle mare while he walked alongside, leading them through country that seemed to exist in a different world from the dust and desolation they'd left behind. As they crested the final ridge, Clara caught her breath at the sight spread out before them. The ranch house sat in a natural bowl between rolling hills, surrounded by the green of carefully tended gardens and the silver glint of water running in irrigation channels that defied everything she thought she knew about this drought-stricken land. How? She whispered, the question containing all her amazement and disbelief. Jake looked up at her, understanding immediately what she was asking. My grandfather was a mining engineer before he came west. He understood water, understood how it moves underground. When he laid claim to this land, he wasn't looking at what was on the surface. He was looking at what lay beneath. He pointed to a series of windmills scattered across the property, their blades turning lazily in the afternoon breeze. Artesian wells, fed by an underground river that hasn't seen dry in living memory. We've got enough water to last out this drought and the next one too. As they drew closer to the house, Clara could see that it was even larger than it had appeared from a distance. 2 stories of solid timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides and windows that caught the light like welcoming eyes. Gardens flourished in defiance of the climate, rows of vegetables and herbs protected by careful shade structures and fed by the life-giving water from the wells below. A man emerged from the house at the sound of their approach, and Clara knew immediately that this was Jake's father. They shared the same tall frame, the same easy way of moving. But where Jake was young oak, Thomas Brennan was aged cedar, weathered and strong and rooted deep. His hair was silver white beneath his hat, and his face carried the lines of a man who had seen both triumph and tragedy, and had learned wisdom from both. Jake, he called, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. You brought company? His eyes settled on Clara and Emma with the same measuring look his son had given them, but where Jake's assessment had been warm, Thomas Brennan's was cooler, more reserved. Pa, this is Mrs. Clara Whitmore and her daughter Emma. I offered them work and a place to stay. Jake's tone was respectful but firm, making it clear that this wasn't a request for permission so much as an announcement of fact. Thomas approached them as Jake helped Clara and Emma down from the horse, his weathered hands gentle as he lifted Emma to the ground. The little girl looked up at him with those solemn eyes that had seen too much, and something in the older man's expression softened. Well now, Miss Emma, he said, his voice dropping to a gentler register. I bet you're tired after that long ride. And hungry too, I'd wager. Emma nodded, finally finding her voice. Yes, sir, she whispered, and Clara felt a surge of pride at her daughter's politeness despite their circumstances. Thomas Brennan, the older man said, extending his hand to Clara. Welcome to the Rocking Bee, Mrs. Whitmore. Any friend of Jake's is welcome here. There was something in his tone that suggested he was reserving judgment, but his handshake was firm and his eyes kind. A woman appeared in the doorway of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was small and compact, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that missed nothing. Thomas Brennan, she called, her voice carrying a slight Scottish accent. Are you going to leave our guests standing in the yard like strangers, or are you going to invite them in for a proper meal? Thomas chuckled, and Clara caught a glimpse of the man he might have been in younger, less burdened days. Mrs. Whitmore, Miss Emma, I'd like you to meet my sister Margaret. She runs this house with an iron fist and a heart of gold. Fair warning, though. She's got opinions about everything and she's not shy about sharing them. Margaret Brennan descended the porch steps with quick, efficient movements, her sharp eyes taking in Clara's mended dress and Emma's too thin frame in a single glance. But there was no judgment in her assessment, only the practical evaluation of someone who understood hardship and knew how to address it. You both look like you could use feeding up, she said matter-of-factly. Come along then, let's get some food in you before we talk about anything else. The kitchen of the Rocking Bee Ranch house was a warm cavern of comfort that seemed to exist outside the harsh realities of the drought-stricken world beyond its walls. Cast iron pots bubbled on a massive stove, filling the air with the rich scents of beef stew and freshly baked bread. Margaret bustled about with the efficiency of long practice, setting places at a worn wooden table that could have seated a dozen people comfortably. Clara found herself seated across from Emma, watching her daughter's eyes widen at the bounty spread before them. "Now then," Margaret said, ladling generous portions of stew into bowls, "I want you both to eat your fill. No picking at your food like birds. You need meat on your bones." She set thick slices of bread beside each bowl, the butter already melting into golden pools on the warm surface. Clara felt tears threaten again at this simple kindness, at the matter-of-fact way this woman was addressing their most basic need. Emma ate with the careful precision of someone who had learned not to waste a single morsel, but Clara could see the wonder in her daughter's face as she tasted food that was both plentiful and delicious. It had been so long since either of them had eaten without worry, without the constant calculation of how long their supplies might last. "So," Thomas said, settling into his chair at the head of the table, "Jake tells me you're looking for work. What kind of experience do you have?" His tone was neutral, neither welcoming nor dismissive, and Clara appreciated his directness. "I've run a household and a farm for 10 years, Clara replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I can cook, clean, manage supplies, tend gardens, preserve food, mend clothing. Before I married, I worked in my father's hotel in Kansas City, so I understand what it means to maintain a standard of service." She paused, gathering her courage for what came next. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Brennan. I'm honest, I'm reliable, and I'm grateful for any chance you might give us." "What happened to your husband?" Margaret asked gently, taking her seat beside Thomas. Clara's spoon paused halfway to her mouth, and she felt Emma's attention focus on her with the intensity that children reserved for discussions they knew might determine their fate. "Consumption took him 2 winters ago," she said quietly. "We tried to keep the farm going, Emma and I, but without Samuel's strength and with the drought." She shrugged, letting the obvious conclusion speak for itself. "I'm sorry for your loss," Thomas said, and Clara could hear genuine sympathy in his voice. "It's been hard times for everyone, but especially hard for folks trying to make it on their own." Jake, who had been quietly eating his stew, looked up from his bowl. "The cabin I mentioned is about a 1/4 mile from the main house. It's got 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and a good well. Previous occupant kept it in decent repair, though it could use a woman's touch." He glanced at his father. "I was thinking Mrs. Whitmore could take over some of Margaret's housekeeping duties, free her up to focus on the ranch books and supply management." Margaret snorted, "As if I'd trust anyone else with the books. But yes, I could use help with the daily cleaning and cooking, especially with Roundup coming in a few weeks. We'll have extra hands to feed, and these old bones aren't as spry as they used to be." "What about Emma?" Clara asked, her protective instincts flaring. "I won't have her underfoot or in anyone's way." "Underfoot?" Thomas's eyebrows rose. "Miss, this ranch has been short on young folks for too long. Emma's welcome to help wherever she's able and interested. We've got chickens that need tending, a garden that could use small hands for weeding, and I suspect she might enjoy learning to ride if she's of a mind to." Emma's fork clattered against her bowl. "Really?" she whispered, her eyes wide with the first genuine excitement Clara had seen from her in months. "I could learn to ride a horse?" "Well now," Jake said solemnly, "it just so happens I've got a pony that's been getting fat and lazy from lack of work. She could probably use a friend to keep her exercised." Emma's smile was like sunrise after the longest night, and Clara felt something tight in her chest finally begin to loosen. But even as relief flooded through her, Clara found herself wondering at the generosity being shown to 2 strangers who had literally nothing to offer in return. In her experience, such kindness usually came with strings attached, expectations that weren't immediately obvious. She studied the faces around the table, looking for some hint of hidden agenda, some sign of what might be expected of her beyond simple honest work. The cabin Jake had mentioned proved to be better than anything Clara had dared hope for. 2 rooms with real glass windows, a stone fireplace that drew properly, and walls that didn't whistle with every wind. Emma ran from room to room, her footsteps echoing on wooden floors that were solid and level. Her laughter, the first truly joyful sound Clara had heard from her in months. The well outside the front door produced clear, cold water with just a few pumps of the handle, and the small garden plot behind the cabin showed signs of recent care. "Previous tenant was Ben Morrison," Jake explained, leaning against the doorframe as Clara examined the kitchen area. "Good man. Worked here for 5 years before he decided to try his luck in California. Left everything in good condition. Said he hoped the next folks to live here would be as happy as he'd been." Clara ran her hand along the smooth surface of a wooden counter that someone had sanded and oiled with obvious care. There were shelves for dishes, hooks for pots and pans, even a small pantry with built-in bins for flour and sugar. It was simple but complete, everything needed for a comfortable life. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. "When would you like me to start work?" "How about tomorrow morning?" Jake suggested. "Give you and Emma time to settle in tonight, get some rest. Margaret will probably want to show you around the main house, explain how she likes things done. She's particular about her kitchen, but she's fair." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Clara, can I ask you something?" Something in his tone made her turn to face him fully. "Of course, back in town, when you were ready to trade your wedding ring for food. That couldn't have been easy." Jake's gray eyes were serious, searching. "But you were willing to do it." "Why?" Clara glanced toward the front room, where Emma was examining the fireplace with the intensity of an explorer discovering treasure. "Because what good is a symbol of the past when the present is falling apart? That ring represented promises Samuel and I made to each other, dreams we shared, but Samuel's gone, and dreams don't feed little girls or keep them warm at night." She met Jake's gaze steadily. "I loved my husband, Mr. Brennan. I still do, but Emma is alive and here and needs me to make practical decisions, not sentimental ones." Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Clara had the strange sensation that she was being evaluated by someone whose opinion had suddenly become important to her. "You know," he said finally, "my mother died when I was about Emma's age. My father was left to raise me and my sister Sarah on his own, trying to run a ranch and be both parents at once." He looked out the window toward the main house. "I remember how hard it was for him, making those kinds of choices between what he wanted to hold on to and what we actually needed." "What happened to your sister?" Clara asked, gently. "Married a banker in Denver 3 years ago. Happy as can be, with 2 little boys of her own now." Jake's smile was warm with genuine affection. "She visits when she can, but it's a long way and her husband's not much for ranch life. Pa misses her, misses having family around." He looked back at Clara. "I think having you and Emma here is going to be good for all of us." That evening, as Clara tucked Emma into a real bed with clean sheets and warm blankets, her daughter asked the question that had been building all day. "Mama, are we going to stay here? Is this going to be our home now?" Clara smoothed Emma's hair, marveling at how much brighter her daughter's eyes looked after just one day of proper food and hope. "I don't know, sweetheart. We'll stay as long as they need us and want us here. We'll work hard and be grateful for the chance, and we'll see what comes next." "I like Jake," Emma said sleepily. "He has kind eyes, and he promised to show me the pony tomorrow." "He does have kind eyes," Clara agreed, surprised by the warmth that admission brought to her chest. "Now go to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day." But long after Emma's breathing had settled into the deep rhythm of childhood sleep, Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling and wondering why a successful rancher's son would offer work and shelter to 2 strangers without references or guarantees. In her experience, men like Jake Brennan didn't make impulsive gestures of charity. They were careful, calculating, practical, which meant there was something about this situation she didn't yet understand. Some piece of the puzzle that hadn't yet revealed itself. Clara's first week at the Rocking Bee passed in a blur of purposeful activity that felt like awakening from a long dream. Margaret proved to be an exacting but fair teacher, showing Clara the routines that kept the big house running smoothly. There were rooms to dust and sweep, meals to prepare for the ranch hands, laundry to wash and mend, and 100 small tasks that together created the foundation of civilized life in this harsh landscape. Emma flourished like a flower after rain. The pony Jake had mentioned turned out to be a gentle chestnut mare named Buttercup, and within days Emma was spending her mornings helping with the chickens and her afternoons learning to sit properly in the saddle under Jake's patient instruction. Clara watched from the kitchen window as her daughter laughed with pure joy, cantering in careful circles around the corral, and felt a gratitude so deep it was almost prayer. But it was the evenings that surprised her most. After the day's work was done and Emma was asleep, Clara found herself lingering on the front porch of their cabin, watching the sun set behind the distant mountains. Often, Jake would appear with 2 cups of coffee and an easy invitation to share the quiet beauty of twilight on the range. Their conversations ranged from practical matters of ranch management to deeper questions about dreams deferred and second chances discovered in unexpected places. "You know," Jake said one evening, settling into the chair beside her. "I've been thinking about what you said that first day, about things being just things, and people being what matter." Clara accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich scent before taking a careful sip. Coffee had become a luxury she never took for granted. "What about it? I've been wondering if maybe you were only half right." Jake's tone was thoughtful, not argumentative. "See, I think sometimes things can matter, but only when they're connected to people. That ring of yours, for instance. It wasn't valuable because of the gold or the diamond. It was valuable because of what it meant to you and your husband." Clara considered this, remembering the weight of the ring in her hand that day in Murphy's store. "But I was still willing to trade it, because you found something that mattered more." Jake agreed. "Emma's welfare. But that doesn't mean the ring didn't have real value, just that you had your priorities straight." He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the darkening sky. "I guess what I'm getting at is that I admire people who understand the difference between the value of things and the worth of people." There was something in his voice that made Clara turn to look at him more carefully. In the fading light, his profile was strong and serious, and she realized with a start that this conversation wasn't entirely theoretical for him. "Jake, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why did you offer us work that day?" "Really? You could have given Sean some money to help us out, or pointed us toward other ranches that might be hiring. But instead you brought two strangers into your family's home. Why?" Jake was quiet for so long that Clara began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "Because I've been watching this drought take everything from good people, and I was tired of feeling helpless to stop it. Because when I saw you in that store, willing to sacrifice something precious for your daughter's sake, I knew I was looking at someone with the kind of character this place needs." He turned to meet her eyes. "And because I thought maybe you and Emma might be the answer to something I didn't even know I was praying for." Before Clara could ask what he meant by that, the sound of hoofbeats approaching at speed interrupted their conversation. A rider materialized out of the gathering darkness, his horse lathered with sweat, and his posture speaking of urgent news. Clara recognized him as one of the hands from a neighboring ranch, and the tight feeling in her stomach told her that whatever news he carried wouldn't be good. "Jake," the rider called as he reined in his mount. "You need to come quick. There's been trouble at the Wilson place." "Bad trouble?" Jake was on his feet instantly, his relaxed evening demeanor replaced by alert readiness. "What kind of trouble, Pete?" "Apache," Pete said grimly. "Looks like a war party hit them 2 days ago. Houses burned, stock scattered. We found old man Wilson and his boy, but Mrs. Wilson and the little girl are missing." His voice dropped. "Could be they were taken, could be they're hiding somewhere. Sheriff's putting together a search party. Wants every available man." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She knew the Wilsons by reputation. A family much like her own had been, trying to make a living from unforgiving land. The thought of Martha Wilson and her young daughter facing the terror of capture or death in the wilderness sent ice through her veins. "How can I help?" she asked, surprised by her own voice. Both men turned to look at her, Jake's expression mixing surprise with something that might have been admiration. "Clara, this isn't work for women. It's dangerous country out there, and if there are Apache war parties moving through." He shook his head. "You and Emma need to stay here where it's safe. Martha Wilson is out there somewhere with her daughter," Clara said firmly. "If they're alive, they're going to need help from someone who understands what it's like to be a mother trying to protect her child. I can track, I can shoot, and I know this country better than most men give me credit for." She stood, decision crystallizing in her mind. "I'm going." The search party that assembled at dawn was grim-faced and heavily armed. 20 men from neighboring ranches united by the unspoken understanding that in this harsh country, everyone's survival depended on standing together against threats both natural and human. Clara had argued her way into inclusion over Jake's strenuous objections, finally convincing him when she pointed out that if Martha and little Rebecca Wilson were found alive, they would need another woman's care and comfort. Thomas Brennan had surprised everyone by offering to stay behind and watch over Emma, his weathered hands gentle as he reassured the frightened child that her mother would return safely. "You mind Margaret and help her with the chickens," he'd told Emma seriously. "And if you're very good, I might teach you how to whittle while we wait." The Wilson homestead was a scene of devastation that spoke eloquently of violence and loss. The house had been reduced to a blackened skeleton of timbers, smoke still rising faintly from the ruins. The barn had been stripped of its contents, and the scattered remains of household goods told the story of lives violently disrupted. Clara forced herself to examine the scene with practical eyes, looking for clues that might tell them what had happened to the missing women. "Here," she called, crouching beside what had been the kitchen garden. "Look at this." The soft earth showed the clear impression of small bare feet, a child's footprints leading away from the house toward the creek that ran along the property's eastern boundary. Rebecca ran this way. "See how the prints are spaced?" She was running hard. Jake knelt beside her, his tracking skills evident in the way he read the story written in disturbed earth and broken vegetation. "And here," he said, pointing to larger prints that followed the child's trail. "Someone went after her. Moccasins, not boots." Sheriff Morrison, a lean man with silver hair and eyes like chips of flint, studied the tracks with professional interest. Could be pursuit, could be rescue. No way to tell from this. He straightened, his expression grave. "We need to follow this trail before it gets any colder. Pete, take 3 men and work the north side of the creek. Jake, you and Mrs. Whitmore follow the south bank. Rest of us will work in a grid pattern, quarter-mile intervals. Signal shots if you find anything." The trail led through increasingly rough country, winding between stands of cottonwood and across rocky ground that made tracking difficult. Clara found herself impressed by Jake's woodcraft, the way he could read sign that was invisible to her untrained eye. They worked in companionable silence, each focused on the task at hand, united by the urgent need to find Martha and Rebecca Wilson before whatever had taken them could spirit them away forever. It was Clara who spotted the cave, a dark opening in a limestone bluff that was almost completely hidden by a tangle of brush and fallen trees. Something about the careful way the concealing branches had been arranged suggested human intervention rather than natural accident. She caught Jake's arm and pointed, and together they approached the hiding place with drawn weapons and racing hearts. "Martha?" Clara called softly. "Martha Wilson, it's Clara Whitmore. Are you in there?" For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, so faintly Clara almost thought she'd imagined it, came the sound of a woman's voice. "Clara? Is it really you?" What emerged from the cave was a woman transformed by terror and desperation. Martha Wilson had always been plump and cheerful, quick with a smile and generous with her hospitality. The woman who crawled from the rocky shelter was gaunt and hollow-eyed, her dress torn and stained, her dark hair matted with dirt and leaves. But in her arms, she cradled her daughter Rebecca, and both of them were alive. "Oh, Martha," Clara breathed, holstering her pistol and rushing forward to embrace her friend. "We were so afraid. When we saw the house, they came at dawn," Martha whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "John and Tommy were in the barn doing morning chores. I heard shooting and screaming, and I grabbed Rebecca and ran for the creek like John always said to do if there was trouble." Tears carved clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "I couldn't help them, Clara. I heard them calling for me and I just ran." Jake fired the agreed-upon signal shots, and within minutes the rest of the search party had converged on their location. Sheriff Morrison took charge of the situation with professional competence, sending riders back to town for a wagon, while the others worked to make Martha and Rebecca as comfortable as possible. Clara used her canteen to clean some of the dirt from Rebecca's face, marveling at the child's resilience. At 8 years old, she had endured 2 days of hiding in a cave, listening to her mother's whispered fears and trying to understand why their safe world had suddenly turned dangerous. "The Apache," Sheriff Morrison said grimly as he questioned Martha. "How many were there? Which direction did they go?" Martha's hands shook as she accepted a cup of water from one of the men. "I don't know. Maybe 6 or 8. They came from the north, riding hard. After they finished with the house, they seemed to be arguing about something. I heard shouting, but I couldn't understand the words." She looked up at the sheriff with haunted eyes. "One of them found our tracks at the creek. He followed them almost to the cave, but then the others called him back. They rode south, toward the Badlands." Jake exchanged a look with Sheriff Morrison that Clara didn't miss. "What is it?" she asked. "The Badlands country is rough terrain," Jake explained. "Good place for a war party to disappear, but also good country for an ambush if they're planning to hit other homesteads. Sheriff, we need to get word to the other isolated farms, warn them what's happening." As they waited for the wagon that would carry Martha and Rebecca back to safety, Clara found herself studying the survivors with new eyes. Martha had lost everything: her husband, her son, her home, yet she had managed to save her daughter through courage and quick thinking. It was a reminder that strength came in many forms, that the will to protect those we love could transform ordinary people into heroes. The ride back to town was somber, the wagon wheels creaking in rhythm with Martha's quiet sobs. Clara rode alongside, one hand on Martha's shoulder, offering what comfort she could to a woman who had seen her world destroyed in a single morning. Rebecca lay curled in her mother's lap, sleeping the exhausted sleep of a child who had endured more than any young person should have to bear. The next few days at the Rocking Bee took on an atmosphere of watchful tension. Thomas Brennan doubled the guard rotation and moved the stock closer to the house, while Jake spent long hours riding the boundaries of their property, looking for signs of unwanted visitors. Clara threw herself into her work with renewed energy, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of cooking and cleaning while her mind processed the horror of what had happened to the Wilson family. Emma, sensing the undercurrent of anxiety among the adults, stayed close to Clara's side and asked fewer questions than usual. But Clara could see her daughter watching Jake with the intensity of someone trying to understand why the man who had taught her to ride was now never seen without his rifle close at hand. It was Margaret who finally provided the explanation Emma needed. "There are bad men in these parts," she told the little girl matter-of-factly as they gathered eggs from the henhouse. "Men who take things that don't belong to them and hurt people who can't protect themselves. The good men, like Jake and his father, have to be ready to stop the bad men if they come around." "Are the bad men going to hurt us?" Emma asked, her voice very small. "Not if we can help it," Margaret replied firmly. "That's why we have good men with guns, and why we all stay close to the house. Sometimes in life, Emma, we have to be brave even when we're scared." "Can you be brave?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I can be brave. Mama taught me how." Clara, listening from the doorway, felt a surge of pride mixed with sorrow. Her daughter shouldn't have to learn about bravery in the face of violence at such a young age, but this was the world they lived in, and there was no point in pretending otherwise. That evening, as Clara and Jake sat on the porch of her cabin sharing their usual coffee, the conversation turned to the question that had been haunting her thoughts. "Jake," she said carefully, "when this is over, when the Apache have moved on or been dealt with, what happens then? To Emma and me, I mean." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his coffee cup balanced on the porch railing as he stared out at the star-filled sky. "I was hoping you might want to make this arrangement permanent," he said finally. "Not just the work, I mean. All of it." Clara felt her heart skip. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying I've come to care about you and Emma more than I probably should have, given how short a time you've been here." Jake's voice was low and careful, as if he were walking through a minefield of possible misunderstandings. "I'm saying that watching you with Emma, seeing how you've brought life and warmth to this house, has made me realize what's been missing from my life. I'm saying I'd like to ask you to marry me, if you think you could ever feel the same way about a man who's not your first husband." The proposal hung in the air between them like a question mark written in starlight. Clara stared at Jake's earnest face, seeing the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide behind his careful words. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to accept the security and companionship he was offering. But another part of her, the part that had learned hard lessons about the difference between love and desperation, held her back. "Jake," she said gently, "I care about you too. More than I thought possible after Samuel. But I need to be sure that what I'm feeling isn't just gratitude for everything you've done for Emma and me. And you need to be sure that you're not just lonely and looking for a ready-made family to fill an empty space in your life." Jake nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his gray eyes. "What do you suggest?" "Time," Clara said simply. "When this crisis with the Apache is over, when life gets back to whatever passes for normal around here, let's see how we feel about each other then. If what's between us is real, it'll survive a little patience." Before Jake could respond, the sound of running footsteps interrupted their conversation. One of the ranch hands appeared out of the darkness, his breathing labored and his face grim with urgent news. "Jake," he called. "Your father wants you at the house right now. We've got riders coming in fast from the south, and they're pushing horses hard. Could be trouble." The riders who thundered into the Rocking Bee's yard in the deep hours before dawn brought news that changed everything. Clara thought she understood about the events of the past week. Sheriff Morrison led the group, his horse lathered with sweat and his face etched with grim satisfaction. Behind him rode 6 men Clara didn't recognize, their clothes and equipment marking them as professional trackers rather than local ranchers. "We found them," Sheriff Morrison announced without preamble as Thomas and Jake emerged from the house, rifles in hand. "The Apache who hit the Wilson place. But it wasn't what we thought. Clara, drawn from her cabin by the commotion, approached the group with Emma's small hand clutched firmly in her own. Something in the sheriff's tone suggested that whatever he had discovered would reshape their understanding of recent events. "What do you mean?" Thomas asked. His weathered face creased with confusion. Sheriff Morrison dismounted stiffly, his movements speaking of long hours in the saddle. Turns out it wasn't Apache at all. It was white men dressed up to look like Apache, probably figuring to throw off any pursuit. His voice carried the anger of a lawman who had been deliberately misled. "We tracked them to a canyon about 20 miles south of here, found their camp and all the evidence we needed, stolen goods from 3 different homesteads, including things taken from the Wilsons. One of the trackers, a lean man with intelligent eyes, and the patient demeanor of someone who made his living, reading stories written in disturbed earth and broken branches, stepped forward. Name's Daniel Crowfeather," he said, his English carrying the precise diction of someone who had learned it as a second language. "I'm a tracker for the territorial government, and I can tell you for certain that no Apache warrior would have left the signs these men left. Too sloppy. Too much like what white men think Indians do rather than what we actually do." Clara felt a chill run down her spine as the implications began to sink in. "You mean Martha and Rebecca were hiding from white men pretending to be Apache?" "That's exactly what I mean," Sheriff Morrison confirmed. "And we caught them red-handed with the evidence. Turns out they've been working this area for months, hitting isolated homesteads and making it look like Indian raids. Figured folks would be too scared to organize proper pursuit, and the territorial government would blame the Apache Nation rather than looking for white outlaws." Jake's jaw tightened with anger. "What about John and Tommy Wilson? Are they dead?" the sheriff said bluntly. "But they went down fighting, took 2 of the raiders with them. We found the graves where the surviving outlaws buried their friends." He looked around at the assembled group. "Point is, the immediate threat is over. We got all 6 of the surviving raiders, and they'll be standing trial in territorial court within the month." Thomas Brennan lowered his rifle, relief evident in the way his shoulders relaxed. "So there's no Apache war party? No ongoing threat to the other homesteads?" "None at all," Daniel Crowfeather confirmed. "My people are as concerned about this deception as you are. False raids that get blamed on Apache make things harder for everyone, create mistrust where there should be cooperation." He paused, studying the faces around him. "Actually, that brings me to another reason I'm here." Clara felt Jake tense beside her, sensing that whatever came next would be significant. "There's a group of Apache families about 30 miles east of here. Good people who've been trying to make peace with white settlers," Daniel continued. "They've been hit hard by the drought, lost most of their traditional hunting grounds to the dry weather. They've got children who are hungry, elders who are sick, and they're looking for some place to winter over until the rains come back." "What are you asking?" Thomas said carefully. "I'm asking if there might be room on Rocking Bee land for a temporary camp. These aren't warriors looking for trouble. They're families looking for survival. They've got skills that could be useful tracking, hunting, knowledge of plants and animals that could help everyone make it through the hard times ahead." Daniel's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much conflict between peoples who should have been allies. "What I'm proposing is the kind of cooperation that could make this whole territory stronger." The silence that followed was heavy with consideration. Clara looked at Jake, seeing the wheels turning in his mind as he weighed the implications. This was the kind of decision that could define not just the immediate future, but the character of the man making it. "Pa," Jake said finally, turning to his father, "you always taught me that a man's worth is measured by how he treats folks who can't help themselves. Seems to me these Apache families fall into that category." Thomas Brennan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from his son to Clara to Emma and back again. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the authority of a decision made with full knowledge of its consequences. "Mr. Crowfeather, you tell these families they're welcome on Rocking Bee land for as long as they need. We'll work out the details of where to set up camp and how to share resources. But I want it understood that this is a partnership, not charity. Everyone contributes according to their abilities. Everyone benefits according to their needs." Daniel Crowfeather's smile was the first truly joyful expression Clara had seen from him. "I'll carry that message gladly, and I think you'll find that Apache gratitude runs deep and long." As the group began to disperse and the immediate crisis atmosphere lifted, Clara found herself alone with Jake in the pre-dawn darkness. The events of the past hours had shifted something fundamental in her understanding, not just of the situation they'd been facing, but of the man standing beside her. "That was quite a decision your father just made," she said softly. "And quite a bit of influence you had on it." Jake shrugged, but Clara could see the satisfaction in his posture. "Just seemed like the right thing to do. Besides," he added with a smile that she was coming to know well, "I have a feeling Emma's going to love learning about Apache ponies and riding techniques. And you." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "I have a feeling you're going to fit right in with a group of people who understand that survival sometimes depends on unexpected alliances." Clara felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness that went beyond simple relief at the end of immediate danger. "Jake," she said carefully, "about what you asked me earlier. About time and patience and making sure our feelings are real. What about it?" "I think I've had all the time I need." Clara reached out and took his hand, feeling the calloused strength of fingers that had worked hard and offered help and never hesitated when courage was required. "I think what we have is real, and I think it's worth building a future on." Jake's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, full of warmth and promise and the kind of joy that comes from dreams unexpectedly fulfilled. "Does that mean yes?" "That means yes," Clara confirmed, and felt Emma's small hand slip into hers as her daughter emerged from the shadows where she had been listening with the focused attention that children brought to conversations they knew would change their lives. "Does this mean Jake's going to be my new papa?" Emma asked with the directness that only children could manage. Jake knelt down to Emma's level, his expression serious and kind. "Only if you'd like that, Emma. I know you'll always remember and love your first papa. I'm not trying to replace him. I'm just hoping I can be someone new who loves you and takes care of you." Emma considered this with the gravity of a judge weighing evidence. "I think I'd like that," she said finally. "But you have to promise to keep teaching me to ride Buttercup." "I promise," Jake said solemnly, and Clara felt her heart swell with the rightness of it all. 6 months later, as Clara stood on the porch of the house that had become truly home, watching Emma race bareback across the pasture in the company of 2 Apache children who had become her closest friends, she thought about the strange paths that led from desperation to joy. The wedding ring on her finger was different from the one she had been willing to trade for food that day in Murphy's store, but it represented something just as precious: the understanding that love could be found again, that families could be rebuilt, and that sometimes the greatest rewards came from the simplest acts of kindness. The Apache families had indeed become partners rather than guests, their knowledge of the land and its resources helping the Rocking Bee weather the remainder of the drought better than anyone had expected. Martha Wilson had found work in town and was slowly rebuilding her life with the quiet strength of someone who had discovered reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. And Clara had found something she had never quite dared to hope for: a second chance at happiness built on the foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and love that had grown from friendship rather than desperation. As Jake emerged from the barn and walked toward the house with that easy grace she had noticed from their first meeting, Clara reflected on the truth that her grandmother had tried to teach her long ago: that gold might buy temporary relief, but genuine treasure could only be found in the connections between people who chose to care for one another. She had offered her wedding ring in trade for food, but what she had received in return was worth more than all the gold in the world. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate with the ancient song of creatures who understood that survival and love were not opposite forces, but different expressions of the same fundamental truth. Clara smiled and went inside to help Margaret prepare dinner for the extended family that had grown around them like wildflowers after rain, grateful beyond words for the day she had walked into Murphy's store with nothing left to lose and everything still to gain.